Doug, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot. And I'm actually starting a timer. I'm timing myself today because I pledged to do this within the confines of an hour, and I'm going to do my best. So first of all, I'm just going to go through a couple things. Let me start with a quick recap of Landscape 1. And when I say quick, I mean real quick. But there's some material in there that I think is really important to understand, especially today when I do this edit, because everything I do is going to be heading towards a goal. Okay, so we're going to go through essentials. And then also I'm going to talk about the thought process that I'm in while I'm editing a photo. Okay. All right, so quick recap on from Landscape 1 for those of you who weren't able to watch it or be in the class. I mentioned in Landscape 1 that the big goal in editing, the overarch goal, is to get emotional impact. And you may all remember that I told this story about that is emotionally touching me right now. So anyway, it's about emotional impact, and it's about getting a wow from your viewer. Okay, and I thought about that after the class. I thought, gee, that's my feeling about it, but I wonder how the judges look at it. So I went to the F3C website yesterday, which is the judging folks in the competitions for the state of Florida photography clubs. And on their website, they're now listing the criteria the judges use to figure out if a photo's worthy of an award or not. And if you read their policy statement on there also, they talk about how the whole purpose of F3C is to help people become better photographers. So this is the lens that they look through in judging what the best photographs are. It's kind of interesting to study it because, look at number 1. Here it is, emotional impact. I was glad to see that because I thought maybe had better check myself on that one because I know how I feel about it. I'm looking for that, but so does the F3C. And so that tells you that is your goal, is emotional impact. And number 2 is as important, and is sort of a brother actually to emotional impact. These two are connected. You can't separate them. And the second criteria is the subject clearly presented. In other words, when the viewer comes into a photo, do they know what the subject is right away? Or do they have to look around to find it? They're being judged on that at F3C. If you go into the competition, they're going to look at a photo and say, well, gee, I'm not sure what the subject is here, and the title may not point to the subject, may not. So I'm kind of confused. That's one of their judging criteria. It's a big one. And like I said, these two go together. If your subject is clearly identified easily by the viewer, you're going to have emotional impact. So these two are connected. And when I edit today, I'm editing towards the subject clearly presented. So that's the overarch, one of the overarch goals that I have is to make sure that the subject is clearly identified quickly by the viewer. And everything I do is moving in that direction today. So, and then the third judging criteria has to do with your technical skills, whether your focus is good. Did you intend to have a bokeh in there, or was that just a mistake? Or is your subject in focus? Is your white balance correct? Do you have weird colors, casts in your picture? This is something that a lot of times in the beginning of learning this stuff, and especially editing, and white balance is maybe off a little bit, and you have these overcasts, these tones that are not true to life. So they're looking for this stuff as the number 3, but these two are the big ones. You have to remember that it's all about your subject being clear and easily identified. And then also like artifacts, spots and halos and all that kind of stuff. It's the technical side, the compositional side that the judges will be studying. But here's number 1. You have to remember this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we get that emotional impact, and how we can get, even more importantly, how the subject is clearly presented. Really important that your subject, a lot of times people will shoot landscapes and they'll have the whole landscape and nothing stands out. So the viewer's kind of confused about where they should look, and they usually will just leave the photo, they'll exit. So we have to make sure that photo, the subject rather, is, it stands out, okay? So we should be creating a pathway for the viewer visually to go find the subject. And this happens in milliseconds, hopefully. But this visual path is what editing is all about if you're trying to achieve this. right? It's about that subject being clearly identified. So we create a pathway right to the subject. So there's no question about it. And then we get the emotional impact, and maybe we win some awards at F3C. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, F3C is going to be accepting photos for the next digital competition starting July 1st, and it goes to the end of July. So you might want to start thinking about these criteria and submitting some photos for that, because we did pretty well as a club last time, and it'd be fun to see some more winners from the club. So again, visual path goes to both impact and the subject being clear, and that's what I'm doing today in my editing. So that's the 30,000 foot view I want you guys to get, is that there's a clear direction in my editing. I'm not just going through a list of tools, although I have done that in the past, and I think we all have. It's more about creating that visual pathway to the subject. So when I do things, that's why I'm doing them. That's what I want you to see today, most of all. Okay, so the visual path, this comes from Landscape 1, LS1, in knowing how a person's eyes will move into a photo, the same way that they move into a natural scene in nature. Understanding how the eyes move through a photo can tell you a lot about how you should edit. And so I'm going to go through some examples here. The human eye will definitely move from darker colors to lighter colors. Okay, so if you want the eye to move from dark to light, dark recedes, and the lighter colors, warmer colors come forward. So your eye's just going to go like this, and that's what you want, because they're your subject, right? So we'll deliberately put cooler colors, darker colors in the foregrounds, because the eye will just naturally drift up this way towards the warmer, brighter light. Now, we talked about this at length in Landscape 1, so I'm not going to go into it anymore, but it's important to know how the eye moves, because you can use that knowledge of dark to light to direct the eye. Here's the pathway, okay? We actually developed that on purpose. Same with cool colors to warm, dark to light. You see that transition going up there? Your eye just goes right up to that subject. There's no question about it. And that's what editing really is all about, is to build that pathway in, so you just can't miss the subject. There's no missing it. High contrast to low contrast, we talked about that in LS1. Cameras record the same amount of contrast throughout a frame, but the eye doesn't see things that way. So we'll selectively put more contrast into the foregrounds. In other words, we'll increase the contrast, and the blacks and the shadows basically create more contrast. And we do that on purpose, because then the eye goes back further and see there's less detail back here, and he goes, oh, there's some three-dimensionality to this. Even though it's two dimensions, it looks like three-dimensionality. High contrast, low contrast. And we talked about also sometimes we'll put a little diffusion in the background just to give that that illusion really of depth in the photo, okay? Sharpness, kind of the same idea. The human eye sees things pretty sharply up front and sees things less sharply in the background. So we'll put selective, here's the keyword, selective sharpening up in the foreground, so that people say, oh, that's a foreground, yeah, middle ground, and look how blurry that is. Nice deep photo, got lots of transitional layers here. That's all cool. We also talked about this in LS1. You want to remember to have foreground objects in your frame. Really important. My brother, I won't go into it, I already talked about it on the film, but if you forget this, and if you just like moved up here and just shot this, you wouldn't have a whole lot of layers in there. You want layers. You want big objects in the foreground, medium-sized objects, and smaller objects, because that's what the eye expects to see when there's depth in a picture in nature. And we just recreate that so that we have layers. We have sharp, contrasty, well-defined, large subjects up front here. We move to smaller, less defined, and then finally off to diffuse. Okay, I hope you're seeing this, because we actually keep this in mind while we're editing, and we edit towards it. We're trying to direct the eye right up here. This is the pathway we want. Okay, and here's another thing, leading lines. I'm sure everybody on this call already knows about these, but there's a bunch of them here. There's a nice little Z shape going up to the subject. There's this warm rock kind of pointing towards this. There's these trees pointing up. There's a whole bunch of leading lines in here. There's sort of subliminal, but they do kind of point towards the subject, and eyes will follow those leading lines up into the photo, which is what you want. You want them to travel back into the photo so that they stay put and enjoy your photo. They don't leave and go somewhere else. What else? Let's see, internal frames. This photo has, and this is something you would do in camera, obviously, when you're out in the field, but this has like a little framing around the subject here. So your eye kind of goes through that frame to the subject. It's just like a frame on a picture. You go to the center to find the subject, and this naturally does that. So we look for internal frames. And transitions, again, we talked about large, medium, small. Well, there's transitions in colors too. We might darken up these rocks with a little bit more blue into these rocks, and a little bit more warm colors up in here. And those are transitions. Here's a transition, there's a transition, there's a transition, there's a transition. There's like 4 or 5 of them in here. And again, it creates that illusion of 3-dimensional depth in a photo, which it lacks being a 2-dimensional medium. So we are looking for transitional layers. That's a good thing to have in a composition. Okay, done with that. But keep that in mind, because those things, I'm actually going to be thinking about those things while I'm editing. I'm going to be directing the eyes towards the subject, and you'll see how I do that. So my thought process while editing, Mark Adamus, the top landscape guy in the world, taught us at one of the workshops, and it really stuck out when he said it. I thought, wow, it's so true. Editing seems so complicated, but it doesn't have to be. It's really only about 3 things that you're adjusting. Brightness, that has to do with, brights, darks, contrast, sharpness, shadows, highlights. That's brightness, it's tonalities. That's one thing we're going to be working on. Color, color contrast, working in complementary color schemes that are more suitable to the eye, all those wonderful things. And atmospherics has to do with putting like sun flares in, which we're actually going to do today. I'm excited to show you this because the pros do this a lot. They call it a light push or a sun flare or something like that to put more drama and atmosphere into a photo. That's kind of one of the things we work on too. In fact, Adamus thinks this is the most fun thing of all to put in photos. So it's 3 things. Don't make it complicated. You're just working on these 3, but you're going to do it in small increments because this is about subtleties. When I started out with Lightroom, I'd take the saturation slider and crank it to the right if you too much, and you just overwork it, and your pixels get overworked, and they start getting crispy and crunchy, and it's not good. So when you watch the pros work, they put real subtle changes in incrementally, and they build so those pixels don't get weirded out. And you'll see how I do that. And I got this from the pros, so you could thank them. So after this, then you think about the scale that you're going to apply the adjustment to brightness, so to speak, or color or atmospherics. We start out in a universal fashion. We adjust these 3 things in Lightroom, which is a universal application, but you can do selective edits also now. They're getting more and more that way. But it's a universal edit primarily where you're affecting everything across the photo. And that's where we start. And then when we want to get a little bit more selective, in other words, if we want to work on just part of a shot, we move over into Photoshop, and we start putting selections in on certain things, on tones or colors or objects or whatever, and we work on just that selection. So it's kind of a medium scale type of an edit on these things, and then we eventually end up in a small edit, which can be, it's a micro edit. It's dodging and burning along a crack or something to kind of accent, pardon me, the crack. So we go through all 3 of these, and that really kind of determines your workflow. And then also, everybody who's done any editing will know that there's multiple ways to do any one adjustment. And so just like anything else, when you have lots of options, there's usually a best practice option. And one thing about these professional guys that we've studied under is they've learned best practice. In other words, for instance, if you go into the HSL panel and you push colors too hard, you'll end up getting banding in your skies and weird things going on. So they'll use other methods of working with color, which I'll show you today, where you're not stressing out the pixels and causing banding and all kinds of other stuff. So we're going to use best practice techniques to adjust these things at different scales. So you're kind of beginning to understand the workflow. And always, 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 you have a goal in mind, which is to create, you want the subject to be real clear. It's got to just, I know what the subject is, boom, it's there. That's the impact. And that's what judges are looking for. So we're going to do this contest thing. We got to know this. We can't have two subjects that are conflicting with each other. It won't work. You got to have one clear subject, and there's a lot of ways to make that happen. But these wonderful critique sessions we have on Tuesday, the judges yesterday were really skilled, I thought, in their critique, because they were talking about those three F3C things pretty often, about, the subject isn't clear. We need a clear subject here. Well, that's really important. So we're going to try and do that today. And part of the thought process too is, do I take a journalistic approach in my editing? In other words, I'm like a National Geo guy or lady, who wants to just record what's there and not change anything. It has to be exact. Or if you're taking pictures for a newspaper or something, you want to record what's there without changing it. Or we go to the artistic side, where we're really more interested in the emotional impact and the mood and all that kind of stuff. Well, the truth is that F3C has categories for both. So there's no right and wrong on this thing. They honor both categories. And that puts validity on the artistic side as well as the journalistic side. There's a place for both. And frankly, my editing is a little bit of both. And what I mean by that is, if somebody sees a photo of mine and then they end up going to that place, I want them to be able to say, oh, I recognize this place. This is the place that Doug had in his photo, or Angie had in her photo, or Dave Kershan had in his photo. I want them to be able to recognize it. But at the same time, I was sort of like Catherine yesterday in her critique session. I will take out distractions like crazy. And the reason is that they're called distractions for a reason. They distract you from the subject. And again, remember, it's about a clearly identified subject. So I get the distractions out. I'll pull things out that are in the way, and I'm going to do it today. You'll see. So I'm a little bit of both. I'm kind of a blending, but it's okay. So if I go to F3C in a competition, I probably will go to the category that will allow me to do some of this stuff. I'm not going to talk too much about that right now. So, all right. So this is kind of like the skeleton, the exoskeleton on a workflow. And that's my workflow. It's what we've noticed with the professionals when they're doing their workflows. This is the exoskeleton. Now, they will do some things differently when you get down into the details, but they start usually in Lightroom. Raw files go in Lightroom, and they do some universal edits on a large scale on these three things. I mentioned that before. Then they go into Photoshop pretty quick, and they start working on selective colors, objects, brightness. They'll select out part of the photo, and they'll just work on that, again, on the same three things. So that doesn't change. And then they'll go to small brushes, and they'll do little tiny edits, like removing spots and whatever. Those are micro edits. So this is the workflow. If you want to understand a professional workflow, this is it. And you'll see it kind of how I go through it today. Now, it's not absolutely in lockstep as far as the sequence. If there's a spot on the frame that's actually considered a micro edit, a small edit, I may go and hit that thing right away because it drives me nuts to look at it. So this isn't, locked in. It just gives you kind of an idea of the scale that you're working in, okay? Okay, so here's the shot that we're going to be working on today, and I got to speed it along here a little bit. Okay, so Angie took this shot of me running out to catch this nuclear sunset that's happening out here, and it's kind of interesting. The sun up here is pushing all this light out the bottom. How cool is that? Whenever you see this set up with the clouds and you've got space underneath, at sunset, good time to get your cameras out, because you get these unbelievable, just beautiful sunsets. The sun will eventually cast light up onto the clouds and the landscape, and it's beautiful. So you see this, that's a good time to run. While I was running, she caught me out in the field. This is not the shot we're working on, by the way, but you can see what I was going for. Aiming into the light is my very favorite way to shoot. Everybody's going to have a preference. Mark Adamus likes side light, off the right shoulder or the left shoulder, because it creates three-dimensionality in his images. But I just love backlighting. I just love the challenge of it. Technically, it's harder, but you get some really dramatic photos. So in landscape one, I basically explained that most cameras have 3 stops of latitude into the shadows today, and mine has 3 on my Sony. Dave Kershan also has 3 stops of latitude into the shadows, where you can bring up shadows. In other words, you could expose for this right here, the bright area of this scene. And then in Lightroom, you could pull up your shadows later and get this back up where it belongs. You can do that up to 3 stops on the Sony without getting a lot of noise and different things that happen. This scene unfortunately went beyond that normal latitude for me, and I knew it going in, so we're actually going to do an exposure blend today. But Angie used Nikon D850, which she loves, magnificent camera. That thing has 3.65 or 3.85 stops of latitude into the shadows, so it's got a much wider dynamic range handling than mine does. But mine's pretty good. The older cameras, you'll find are down around 2.65 stops. So, but this one was pushing the limits, and I knew it wouldn't work. You know, it was, I just knew that what would happen is if I took one shot, you either get this exposed correctly, and this would be, you know, way beyond the limits of being able to recover, or you'd get this exposed correctly, and this would be white blown out. So that's not good creatively, obviously. So it demanded 2 shots. And some of the other exceptions to the rule of being able just to expose for the bright area, which is what I taught in LS1. And that 99%, well, 98% of the time, most of the time, you can just take one shot, expose for the bright area, and then go in the Lightroom and pull up your shadows, you'll be fine. But in these situations where you're aiming into the light, a really strong light source, you're gonna have some issues. Other things, like if you shoot the moon and you wanna get detail on the moon, your land's gonna go black. Okay, or you can, if you expose for the land, your moon's going to be just a white blob up there in the sky with no detail. So you kind of understand where I'm coming from here. Milky Way is the same way. Angie and I just shot the Milky Way down at Mayaca the other day, and that was it's the most technical shot I ever did. It was 27 exposures to get the sky with the Milky Way and the land all correct, and it worked. It worked perfectly. I was kind of surprised, but it worked great. But that's a situation where you can't shoot the Milky Way and get the land exposure in the same shot. You just can't. Nuclear sunset, same way, this type of thing. I mean, even on our iPhone, it was blown out up here, you can see. So, you know, anytime you have real strong backlighting, you're better off going to an exposure blend, which is what we're going to do today, okay? So this is how it works with the exposure blend. Basically, you have a shot for the sky, and all you're interested in is from here on up. You don't care what happens down here. In other words, when we're editing, you don't pay any attention to this. This is all you're interested in with the sky. And then when you go to the land shot, your land shot, you're just interested in this down here. And you can forget about this. Doesn't matter what happens here, okay? Once you get these photos in a Lightroom, you want to edit each one individually. And the overarch goal with editing these in Lightroom to begin with is to get this transitional zone right here. This is where we're going to transition. We're going to take this photo and put it on top of this. So your transition layer is here. And you want to get this transition layer, you want the midtones in the sky and the land shots to be close together, as close as you can get them, before you actually do your exposure blend. So that's kind of what we're after. Real important to get those midtones about the same. And then after you get these done in Lightroom, you'll see me do this. We'll send them over to Photoshop as layers. They come in as 2 different layers, and we'll start to work with them there. And then we align them in Photoshop and get them all aligned, because these fronds of grass here, you want to make sure they're aligned between the 2 photos, so that when you do the transition, you don't have weird looking things going on there. And then we'll do an exposure blend, which is probably the coolest thing in the talk today, which is fun because we're doing it with a gradient. Some people would come in here and they would use a brush and they'd paint it out, and that's fine. But the gradient is really cool, so I'll show that to you. And then you crop the extra out, because you'll have a little overlap once you align these things. There's a little extra in there. You'll crop that out and flatten it into one photo, and then you continue, because now you only have one photo. It's been exposure blended. You can continue on in Photoshop with your editing. Okay, so I'm going to go into Lightroom right away, and this is my sky shot. As I mentioned before, I kind of exposed for the sky to make sure it wasn't blown out, and you can see I'm not on the wall right here, so that's all good. And we're going to start working on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is go up. I just started doing this recently. Joseph Rosbach had a seminar going on, and he taught this, and I thought it was a pretty cool start to editing. You have this all these different panels that you can kind of scroll over and see how it changes your photo as a starting place, which is kind of cool. I'm almost always in Adobe Color. I learned that from a number of the pros, actually. They like Adobe Color as a platform for building off of. Joe Rossbach has recently said that neutral is even better yet, because your pixels will be less stressed if you start with this, and you'll get less issues down the road if you use neutral. So he's actually starting with neutral a lot of the time. I decided on the sky shot to use Adobe Landscape because I'm trying to build some yellow, some warm colors into the sky here. So I'm going to go ahead and pop Adobe Landscape. And then when I start with my editing in Lightroom, I generally will start on the bottom, okay? And I'll work up this way. And I picked that up probably in Joe Rossbach's seminar on Zion, I don't know, but instead of working this way, I work the other way. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the pros do that. And I hope that hopefully that'll become evident why. So they'll start in calibration. And this is a universal saturation edit, although I'm not using saturation, I'm not using HSL. We're using the saturation sliders down here, the primary colors, to build saturation in. Almost always I will use the blue slider because it adds a lot of oomph to the colors. Generally, your warmer colors really start to pop. And this is a really gentle way of handling pixels. You don't get, like I mentioned earlier, the color banding and all the stuff that goes on when you start saturating colors. This is very friendly to colors. But in this particular case, because I want to start building some warmth up here in the sky, I'm going to use the red saturation slider. See how that orange kind of popped in there? And that's very, very close to the original photo, which is kind of nice. And then from there, I'll go up, I skip effects and transform. I'll go up to lens corrections and always check your remove chromatic aberration. That has to do with color fringing along edges, which is never a good thing. So you always want to check that. Adobe should just make that a default, but anyway, always have that checked. And then this one is actually an optional one. Generally, when you pop it, it'll load up your lens that you used on the shot. In this case, an 11-24 Canon. And if you'll notice, if I turn this off, okay, I've got some vignetting as a result of using that wide angle lens in here. And it's also got a little barrel distortion to it. But if I pop it on, you can see how it kind of popped the photo flat and also the vignetting out. So that's kind of cool. It does tend to crop the edges a little bit, so you have to be aware of that. So I use it sometimes I don't, depends. All right, so moving on. Detail has to do with sharpening, and generally, well, with the skies, we want more detail up here, less detail back here. In fact, we want this softer, so I'm not going to put any sharpening in the skies. That won't help us at all in building the visual pathway in. Highlights, I am going to go over to about 22 degrees on the color wheel for some highlights. And I'm going to add in some, maybe 22 points about in there somewhere in saturation. I'm not going to do any shadows, although I have that choice here. And this is rather interesting. This panel, what it's really about is building cool tones into your shadows, because remember how the eye moves from cool to warm, right? So we're going to start to build this visual path now from these cooler colors in the shadows up to the warmer colors up here. And you'll actually see the warmer colors developing in this region right here as we go. But I'm not going to put any more shadow detail in the sky. We're going to move on and do that later on in the land. Okay, let's see, in the HSL panel, I'm going to pull the saturation down on the clouds. Again, we're just looking at the sky, and I'm going to pull that down considerably. So I'm trying to get some of that visual weight out of those clouds. They're a little bit heavier than what we saw. And I don't think it represents really the feeling of the scene that we noticed and witnessed out there. So I'm going to pull those back. And then I'm going to go into the oranges on saturation. I'm going to pull those up about 33 points, somewhere in that range. Let me back it off one. I'll just pop it. Sometimes it's easier just to pop it in there. And I'm going to pull luminosity up on the orange also, which is the brightness of the orange. I'm going to pull that up. Let's see, about 7 points. Fortunately, I did this before, so I can know it kind of looks good as I can keep things moving. Okay, and then tone curve, I'm not going to use basic. I'm going to go back up into the basic panel, and up there, I'm just going to do two things for this sky. I'm going to pull the shadows up. Again, I'm going to lighten up those clouds a little bit, and I'm going to pull the highlights back about 6 points. There. Okay. And now I'm, in my view, in my mind anyway, I'm done with the sky for right now. I'm not done editing it, but I'm done with the sky for right now. So we're going to go grab the land this time, and we're going to work on that. Okay, same thing, profile, Adobe Landscape, keep it consistent. And we're going to go down to the bottom again and start with calibration. And this time I am going to use the blue. I'm going to use the blue saturation slider, and you want to, kind of play with it and see how much you want to throw in there. I'm going to go to a full 100% on the blue. We're building the color now into the whole image on a universal way. Okay. Lens corrections, same thing. Remove chromatic aberration. Always check that, and I'm going to keep consistent with this to make sure that we're adjusting for the lens that I used. Detail, I'm going to add some detail now because we're talking about this foreground. Don't worry about this. I know it's getting blown out. We're over here too far already, in my view. This is all we're looking at right here, okay? It's kind of, you have to almost selectively look at your shot when you're doing it. So when the pros do sharpening, they'll take the radius down to 0.5. And then this part's kind of cool. This is actually really cool. If you hold down your Option key on a Mac or your Alt key on a PC, it allows you to build a mask, a sharpening mask, which is really cool because you do not want to sharpen the dark areas. You'll just put noise into the dark areas. So you'll notice the sky is like pretty dark. It's the white areas only that are going to receive this sharpening. So I'm going to just get the edges where I want them. And then I'm going to take the sharpening, in this case, all the way to the right. And if you come in on like these stamens down here in the flower, you can see those things are razor sharp. In fact, they're almost too sharp. They're sharper than the eye would see them. So we're going to actually adjust that some more in a minute here, but not right now. So split toning, we're going to start to separate again the cool tones in the foreground down here and bring them up into these warm tones up here. So that will, split toning helps us do that. And we'll go over to about 22 again on the warm side. My finger's not working well on this pad today, but anyway, there we are. Okay, and we're going to take the saturation up to about 25 points. These are approximate anyways. It doesn't matter if I hit it, but and we are going to do shadows in this one because we're talking about we want some blue into these shadows. So I'm going to take that to 230. That seems to be a really nice color blue for shadows, and I'm going to take the saturation up actually down to about 18 on that. So now we have, we talked about subtleties before, right? Subtle. You don't see blue in there, but there's blue in there, and there's a lot of warm in here that you're not really aware of. So it's already, the eye is already wanting to go this way, right? We're trying to, again, make the subject clearly identifiable, and it wasn't in the beginning. You saw the raw photos, but we're working this area right here so that the eye knows where to go. Okay, especially this, but it's actually kind of inclusive. Okay, so we go up to HSL, and let's see, we're going to do, we're going to make those stamens a little bit more red because it is part of the subject, and I think it's a very interesting part of the subject. And the grass is a little bit on the green side. Grass has a lot of yellow in it, like most leaves do. So we're going to go up to the hue, and we're going to take the hue down to somewhere in that zone there. We're going to put a little bit more yellow. If you slide this yellow, you see how you have choices of color in the greens here. We're moving more towards the yellow. And then I'm also going to bring the luminance of the green up plus 20, thereabouts. Okay, so again, we're trying to work on these midtones in here to make sure that the midtones are similar between the sky shot and the land shot for the blending that we're going to do. Now come up to basic, and I'm actually going to warm this up a lot. I'm going to take it up to around 68 and change, somewhere in that range, and I'm going to take the shadows up to +8. Whites I'm also going to pull up, put some brightness in here. So on the clarity side of things, as I mentioned before, this is actually sharper than the eye will see. The cameras actually produce a sharper image than the eye sees. So we just learned this recently from Joe Rossbach, again, in one of his Zoom webinars. What he'll do is he'll take clarity down 12 points or thereabouts. You know, it's all what you like, which softens up. It puts almost like a glow effect on the subject. Okay, and then he'll come back in with texture, and he'll take the texture up to 46. And so what you're ending up with is softness with detail, if that makes any sense. So now when you look at it, you've got both the glow and the detail and the stamens. I mean, if you look at those stamens, they're pretty sharp, but there is a glow, kind of a softness to it, which is a preferable way for the eye to see it. Okay, so we'll select both photos that we've edited now and move the midtones towards each other, and then we'll go into Photoshop. Not here, we're going to go down here where it says open as layers in Photoshop. Okay, and so what'll happen now is it'll punch those over into Photoshop as layers over on the right over here. You'll actually have both layers come in over here. It just takes a minute. And very shortly here, we'll have both images up. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to name this one Sky, and I'll name this one Land, just so we can keep track of what we're doing here. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight both of them. I'm going to actually turn on Keycaster, which will show you the shortcuts that I'm using in Photoshop if you're interested. Okay, so we'll go up to Edit and Auto Align Images, or Layers rather. And that's going to, again, line up the fronts and all that kind of stuff. I usually use Auto, but you can also use Reposition. You can just try different ones and see what you like, but this one seems to be fairly working fairly well. Okay, now you can see that they've aligned and I've got some overlap from the bottom photo, so I'll have to come back in and trim that, but not right now. We'll do that after we do the exposure blend. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, just a really quick Photoshop thing here. And for some people that maybe haven't used Photoshop before, the top layer is the one that you see over here, okay? And if I take the opacity of that layer down, you'll see the bottom layer start to show through, okay? Are you following me? So the predominant shot, even though we have two up here, it's going to show this, right? But there is one underneath it. So the question is how to get the land in here, and that's what we're going to do next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop a layer mask on here. And a layer mask, basically, the rule of thumb, I imagine almost everybody's heard this before. Whites reveal and blacks conceal. Okay, so if I come in here and I grab a brush and I make sure it's on black and at 100% opacity, and I have this mask selected, if I paint black on this mask, okay, you're going to start to see the bottom layer showing through, okay? And the reason is because, again, black conceals. So the white is showing everything in this photo except for what's in black, and that black allows the bottom layer to come through. So that's the theory behind what we're going to do here. Although I'm not going to use, I'm not going to actually use a brush to do it. Oh, that's one way you can do it, but it gets a little more complicated. So the way I'm going to do this, and this is again, a Joe Rossbach thing. I guess I'll have to pay him a lot of credit because we've learned an awful lot from the Joseph Rossbach. We're going to come over here and grab a gradient tool. Okay. And the gradient tool will, you should have it on black to white, 100%. And what it'll allow you to do, let's go ahead and do it and then I can explain it. Okay, so we're going to set the top of the gradient right here, and I'm going to pull it down to maybe about in there. Now watch what happens when I let go of my mouse key. Okay. All right. So let me explain what just happened. Okay. The white is allowing the sky to show, right? So we're seeing the sky from this layer. The gradient goes from light gray to dark gray to black eventually. So you get this nice transition zone in here. And then black is concealing what's on here and showing what's down here. So you have, now you have both photos blended. Okay. I think that's pretty cool. And you can actually go back and try different gradients to see what you like the best, what makes the most sense to you as far as what you want to see. I just happen to play with it a little bit, and I kind of like this gradient right here, which is the one we're going to use. Okay. Now you're going to notice right away that you know, this zone in the middle here, the center of, oops, let me back up here. I don't know what just happened there. Okay. This center of interest right down here is becoming more prominent. It's becoming more and more pronounced so that people know what the subject is. And they'll, by the time we're done with this, they're really going to know what the subject is. We're going to make sure they do. So right at this point, we're going to go ahead and flatten the image. And you can see the keystroke up here that allows you to do that. And then I'm going to throw a crop on here, and I like the way the pros do it. They don't use the crop tool, some of them do, but this is another way to do it. You just use the marquee selection tool to find your crop and then come up to image crop and crop that out. It seems to be a lot quicker than the crop tool, and then you deselect it, obviously. And now I'm gonna hit a command save here, which saves the photo back to Lightroom. If you look down here, it's saving it back to Lightroom. This is an iteration now that is locked in Lightroom. And sometimes when you're in Photoshop and you've got multiple layers going on, a lot of stuff, it can freeze up on you, and then you lose your edits, and you kind of have to go back to square one unless you've got an iteration in Lightroom you can go back to. So that's why I did it. Okay, so I'm going to turn this layer now into a background layer and bring up another pixel bearing layer that we can work on. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do is what I call a 2-in-1 vignette. Did I spell that right? No. Okay, there we go. Okay, and what I mean by that is we talked about Rembrandt light in LS1. Rembrandt light is kind of a spotlight on the subject, then everything fades to kind of black as towards the edges, which just puts your eye right on the subject because, you know, again, dark recedes, lights come forward, so, you know, your eye just goes boom to the subject. If it's brighter, considerably brighter. So we're going to build almost like a Rembrandt effect in here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into Nick Collection, Color Effects Pro. This is very similar to Luminar. I know a lot of club members have Luminar and they use it, and Topaz. This works as a drop down within Photoshop. It's a subset of Photoshop and it has some wonderful tools in it. That little extra something if you want to put in a photo, you can find some really great things like glows and stuff in Color Effects. But again, it's just another option. I know a lot of people love Luminar, and that's totally cool. So I'm going to turn off tonal contrast, and I'm going to come over here and pick darken, lighten center as an option. Okay, and then you have choice up here of whether you want, you know, a wide center bright area, or you want this one. I'm going to actually pick this one because I want this to be the center of interest, and I want to put, you know, all the interest right here. I want the attention to go here. Boom. And that's what we're building towards it. Now, this is the 30,000-foot view I was talking about. We're bringing that subject forward, so there's no question about it. The viewer knows exactly where to look. Okay. So in this particular case, I'm going to bring the center luminosity up to about 38. And put a little bit more brightness into the center to highlight that subject. I'm going to bring the border luminosity, which is dark and light. We're going to bring that border luminosity down to maybe 21, so in that range. It seemed to work very well when I did it before. And then the center size has to do with how large you want that spotlight in the center, right? So we're going to go to 59. By the way, if anybody wants to know about color effects, I can talk to them privately about it or in the chat session later. I have a link where you guys could take a look at it if you want. I think they used to have a trial for 30 days. I'm not sure if they're still doing that. But anyway, I think somebody, Dave Kirshan maybe, had a free access to a free version of color effects. That goes into a long story I won't go into right now, but we can talk about that later. Okay. So I'm going to hit OK on this. You can see how we're getting this beautiful effect in here where the center is just coming forward and the sides are going down. When people put vignettes on a photo, what they're basically doing is they're just directing the eye to the light part, to the center, which is where you want it. That's where the subject is, right? Okay, so we're going to do something really fun next, which is, again, something we learned from Joe Rosbach. I guess maybe I should just take workshops from Joe Rosbach. And he said, we've learned a ton and didn't actually realize how much we had learned from the guy. But I'm thinking maybe a Southwest workshop in the fall. Angie, if you're on the line, she can't answer. So, okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a light bleed. Now, there are people on the journalistic side that won't like this, but it's possible that you could have a nice light flare coming down in here. It would be reasonable to expect that within a scene like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Camera Raw this time, which is basically the Lightroom within Photoshop. Same algorithms for all the sliders and everything. It's just inside of Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is come up here to the radial filter, okay, and then it brings down this wonderful menu of items that we can put into that filter, and you want to make sure that's checked. It's because it automatically resets all your sliders to 0, which is great. Didn't used to be that way in the last iteration of Camera Raw, and now it's in there, and that's great because it saves some time. And then I'm going to build with this cross here. I'm gonna actually put a radial filter in here, okay, and I'm gonna come down to about that far into the flower, and I'm going to spin it because what I want is I want a light track in here, so the eye will go from cool, dark to warm, bright, even more so. Okay, that's the idea, and there'll be a pathway to the flower with this path that I'm going to put in here. So we're going to go white balance. We're going to warm it up considerably to plus 21. This is a recipe for a light flare, by the way. You guys might want to take notes on this because this is pretty cool. We're going to go to 0.4 on the exposure. We're going to pull shadows up 21 points. We're going to take the white up to make things brighter, a lot brighter, plus 40. About in there. And it's getting a little bright. It's okay, don't worry about it. We're going to adjust for that. Blacks are coming down 10 points for this particular one because, again, it's a light flare. We want not to have a lot of blacks in that flare. Okay, so there's the recipe for the light flare, and then we're going to come up to, we're going to okay it and then come back into Photoshop. Remember, in Photoshop, you always have this wonderful thing called opacity, which is the final word on an adjustment. I can pull this back to 0, where there's no adjustment, or I can go up to 100, or anywhere in between. And that's wonderful to know. It's kind of reassuring, because if you overdo something, you can always pull it back. So I'm going to come down to about 53% on this, and now we have a nice little light flare. I'll show you the before and after. This is before, okay? Now again, remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the subject clear, right, and bright. Okay, you can kind of see what it does there. It just pops all that brightness, and attention goes right to the flowers, which is totally cool. So, okay, let's keep moving here. I am going to do one more thing here. I'm going to put a layer mask on this because I don't want all this brightness up here. So I'm going to come in with a black brush, and I'm going to take it out. In other words, I'm going to paint on this mask again, make a nice big brush, and I'm just going to sweep over the top and take some of that that brightness out of the sky above the sun. In other words, I want the light all to be directed at that flower. Okay, so you can see in the mask here that I'm building, it's not allowing that that adjustment to be shown up here above the sun. Okay, so now we're going to do selective color. And And again, we're working on a selection of colors. So we're going to go to image, adjustments, selected color, and we're going to start working on the reds. Now in this panel, I'm sure some of you have used this. It's a fairly complex panel. You have adjustments on the color for, you can darken and brighten the reds in the photo, and you can find out where the reds are too by doing this. And so if you want to darken a color, you can do it here, which is what we're going to do. I'm going to actually darken the reds to plus 23. And I'm going to come under the cyan. Cyan is the opposite. This is cyan over here. Cyan is the opposite of red. So if we go towards the red to a minus 15, it's going to add more red to the photo. Okay, I'm hit OK on this, and you're going to see, you know, that's pretty bright. That red is nice and it's popping, which is what we want because it is the subject. And red is an attractive color, if not the most attractive color. And then on the whites, oops, we lost selected color because I got out of it. Okay, so on the whites now, we're going to go towards the blue side on the white. So what I mean by that, on the yellow slider, if I go more yellow, these flowers that have yellow in them are going to go more yellow. I want to go the other direction, so I'm taking yellow out. I like my whites nice and white. Is there white? White. Nice and clean, and you can see the before and after. It's very subtle, but it's just making the, okay, so that's with the whitening, and that's without. Just taking some of the yellow out subtly. And then we'll go down to the blacks, and on the blacks, we're going to add a little bit of blue. Okay, so this is the yellow slider, and yellow is opposite of blue. So this is going towards yellow, and this is going towards blue. I'm just going to pop it once into the blue category. And what we're doing again is we're putting blue in the blacks in here, right? Because blue is a cool color, and it pushes your eye towards the warmer colors, the brighter colors. It's subtle, but this is visual path. This is visual flow. This is the whole idea is to brighten this up and just basically give the eye a pathway right up to the subject. When they look at a photo, they go right there in milliseconds, literally, but it's because of all this visual pathway work that we're building in here. There. Okay, so the next adjustment is also a color adjustment, and it's up here in the same place. Go to color balance. And this is very much like split toning, okay, except we're adding in the midtones now. So now we can make the separation between cool colors and warm colors even more dramatic. And we want to keep working on that subtly to build that flow into the photo. And it's there, you can't see it, and that's the wonderful part. So we're adding blue into these shadows down here. And I'm also going to go -2 on the cyan. So we're putting more cool colors in the all the midtones in here. Same with the, and again, you're not going to see these. I'll click this on and off as Dave requested. It's subtle. So here's with the blue added to the foreground. Here's without. See how it's warmer, and I'm cooling it off again, because then your eye goes to the warmer part. All right. Yeah, I hope you're following this line of reasoning. It goes back to the visual path things we talked about earlier. Shadows, same way. Shadows are going to be cooler, so I'm going to go +1 and -1. So it's, towards the blue and the cyan in the shadows. And then on the highlights, those are obviously the warmer parts. So we're going to push those towards the yellow side, -3 thereabouts, and +3 on the reds. Okay, now I'm going to pop this on and off so you'll see the whole panel without. And I guess where I would look is maybe into this area, like maybe in here, because you'll see it cool off a lot when I pop this on. See how it kind of turned more blue? It's subtle, but that's what really makes a photo special, is all these little subtle gradations we're putting in here. Okay, and then I'm going to hit OK. And I'll name this color balance. Okay, and then we'll go to the next layer of adjustments, and we're going to do, let's see, what are we doing next? We're going to lighten those clouds up because they're still kind of heavy. So I'm going to call this clouds. Okay, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to go into the TK panel. If I don't know if you guys have used Luminosity Mask before, but it allows you to go in and select a certain luminosity, a certain tonal value, and adjust just that. So this is a very selective adjustment. And so what we do is we turn it into a composite first, which is black and white. It has all the shades of gray in here, the tonalities of gray. And then you can go in and select just one tonality. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to work on these clouds up here. Remember, white reveals? So if I make that a mask, now when you look on this mask, you're going to see white up here. And so that's where I want this adjustment to go, is into that white area. If I paint over the black area with the adjustment, nothing will happen because it's black, but the white area will reveal what I'm going to do. I know it's a little confusing, but we can sure talk about it in detail either at the end or another time. You can always email me and I'll be glad to share this with you. So I put a darks 3 on there. Now I can go to the dodge tool, which is adding, you basically have a brush with light on it. You can add more brightness. If you're dodging, burning is darkening. Light, well, we're going to dodge, which is to lighten, and we're going to lighten the shadows 38%. Was already said. That's wonderful. Makes it easy. Okay, so I'm going to make a big brush, and I'm basically just going to paint in a broad fashion over the sky. See, I'm not lightening the sky any, but I am lightening those dark spot parts of the cloud. That's a very selective, it's a selection that's helping me to paint just where I want it without having to be very, very careful. And I'm just going to paint it down to where I think it looks more like what I saw that night, what Angie and I saw in the field. And that should be good. So we're going to go to the next thing, which is to, I'm going to turn the keycaster off, so you're not going to be bothered by that. And we're going to remove some distractions. Now this goes to Catherine's wonderful skills yesterday. I like to remove things that distract from the subject, and there's a big one in my view. Now you might not feel that way, but this frond right here is going right through the subject. So I'm going to make this a little larger by hitting Command S, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down while I move this up so I get a good view on it. I'll go up and I'll grab the spot healing brush, and I'm just going to start painting this frond out in a big fashion first, and then I'll come back and I'll clean it up with another tool. So I'm just going to keep painting until this thing is not a distraction for the eye. Yeah, these things tend to, if they pull the eye away from the subject, it's not good. Because again, those judges out there are going to be looking for the subject. They want a clear shot at the subject without any distractions. So just trying to remember that when you're doing it. I think what I'll do is I'll just pull it back down here and just let it be sort of a, just a piece of grass that's shorter. Okay. And now I'm going to come back in with a sister tool in this panel, which is the patch tool. Patch tool is really great for taking things out with precision. You can just draw a little line around the thing you want to get rid of and then just drag it somewhere where it has better color, and it just takes it right out. This is great for like removing people in your subjects, larger things that you want to take out of your photos, or just distractions, things that deter a person from knowing what the subject is clearly. Again, this is all about going towards accenting that subject, making it really jump off the page. Okay, and then I can get rid of some of this stuff the same way. Okay, and maybe just a little bit more here. You kind of see what I'm doing. I'm just trying to, make sure nothing looks unusual in here. Okay, and I'm just gonna, then that piece of grass will look like just a piece of grass that's short, and it won't be sticking through the subject. See how that cleaned it up? These little tiny things really make a difference. I'm down to micro edits now. I'm down to that real small scale stuff, but this stuff matters, and the judges do look for it. So, and also a trained eye will see it. So you want to make sure you take care of it. Okay, so this is frond. Oops. Sorry. And we're gonna do one more distractions, because I do know I have some spots in here. I got to clean my sensor one of these days. spot. Okay, and with this one, I'm going to go up to, let's see, I'm going to use the clone stamp tool, actually, which is my preferred method. There's like 5 different ways to do this, but I like the clone stamp tool. It's just something that I've learned to use. It's a fairly complicated tool initially when you learn how to use it, but it's really not. And when you learn what it does and how to use it, it's pretty quick. So I'm just going to hold the Option key down, and I'm going to click on my mouse, and what it does is it picks up pixels right here where I am, like paint on a paintbrush, and you just drop it right in there, and that thing is gone. There's another one over here, which is actually not a spot in my sensor or my lens, but it's a cloud that looks like a spot, so I'm getting rid of it. Okay, I'm going back out to the image, and that's pretty much it for distractions. We're kind of going to be winding up here shortly, but I have a couple more things to do, which is color effects. And I'm going to add some micro contrast. We are winding it up here very shortly, so wow, I can't type and talk. Okay, all right, so we're going to go into color effects. Oops, come here, you. And let's see, we're going to do that later because that always creates issues. Or it can create issues, I should say. Okay, once this loads, Dave, in regards to what you said earlier, I will show you before and after on this because it adds a lot to a photo, and it's nice to see the before and after. So I'm going to go grab 2 different contrast things in this program, which are just terrific, I think. It defaults a little weird to begin with. I think their settings are way off. So I zero these out, and I put this on fine. This is tonal contrast. And then you can go in and actually adjust the contrast on things, either more or less. I'm going to take midtones down to there, and I'm going to take the shadows up to about maybe in there. I'm thinking it's all really what your eye sees and what you like. And then I'm going to add another filter to that. And by the way, you can go back and adjust these anytime if you don't like what you did, which is kind of nice in this. We're going to go to Pro Contrast, which is a terrific, wonderful. Angie loves this. I think this is her very favorite tool. And I'm going to take Dynamic Contrast up. Watch this thing just start to pop when I do this. It really comes off the page. I'll go to like maybe up in there, and then I'm going to hit OK. And I only have 2 more things to do, so I'm gonna go through them as quickly as I can here. For you guys, I appreciate your patience, and we'll be done with this shortly. Then we'll just go right into keep questions and answers. And if you guys can't stick around, don't feel bad leaving. But if you want to stick around, that's great. I'll stick around as long as I need to answer questions. And you're always free to email me after this. If you have questions after you watch the video, for instance, about how a tool works or whatever, you can always email me, and I'll be glad to spend as much time as needed to show you exactly, what that tool is all about. I know I'm going kind of fast, but that's what the recording is for, so that you can kind of come back in and really study these things. I wanted you to see the overall flow, which is to build a visual path today, and I think you can see how this visual path is in here. It's it's cool to warm, dark to light. You got this beautiful relationship here going on with all this lit up area here. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is, or the second to last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and remove some noise. And this is selective noise removal. I don't like to apply a noise reduction on the whole photo. Because when you are taking noise out of a photo, you're also you're dulling the image down. You're blurring the image, and you don't want to blur everything. You want the subject to be sharp, so you don't want to blur that. So I like to do selective sharpening, and the way I do that is I grab a brush. This is ACR or Adobe Camera Raw within Photoshop, it's Lightroom basically reproduced in here. And I'll just go down to noise reduction and I'll slide that all the way to the right. Okay, so now what I have is a brush tip, which has a little bit of a feather on the edge, as you can see. We're at about 75% on the feather, and or 75 rather, and then this brush tip has noise reduction on it. So now I can come in and I can go in a little bit closer to a photo, and I can push the space bar down, go up to the upper left corner. It's usually where I start, and I just start painting out noise. And you don't want to paint out the fronds because you want to see the fronds. And you're going to adjust the size of your brush by hitting the bracket keys. Left bracket, it makes it smaller. Right bracket makes it larger. And you can just paint out any distracting noise that's getting your attention off the subject. If the noise is evident in a photo, it can really distract. It's one of those distraction things. So make sure you clean it up to your taste. And also, you'll notice when you look at a photo at 100%, which I'm not at right now, I'm at 66. But if you look at it at 100%, you're going to see the image just as if it was a print on the wall. Okay, so in other words, this noise, if it shows, let me just go to 100 and you'll see. Okay, this is how you would see it if it was on the wall. So you want to make sure that, if you go to 100% when you do this kind of selective removal of noise and distractions, because you'll see it in a print otherwise. And I don't know if the judges take it to this level, but I know on a website that I was asked to critique on to help with critiquing, these guys notice this stuff. They'll notice it right away and don't point it out. They expand your photo to 100% or even beyond, maybe beyond, most times beyond that, and they check everything out. So you're going to make sure you get all this, get it painted out. There's no reason not to. Just go ahead and paint it out. You're going to usually find it in the skies, in the broad expanses of color. So it's in the darker zones, particularly in the sky, you're going to find range. Or noise rather, I'm sorry. Noise is actually the proper term. Okay, so that's enough. I'm going to okay that, and then I'm going to collapse all these layers down. So if anybody wants a picture of the history of it, you can do it. Or you'll be able to see it in the recording, so I won't worry about that. But I'm going to send this back over with the command save to Lightroom. And you'll see it down here. It's actually loading it to Lightroom right now. So I'll go back to Lightroom. And it should be loading up here very shortly. Well, that's actually it. No, it's coming in, sorry. There we go, okay. So there's the image. I might pull the highlights back just a little bit, just to kind of get that sun more in a position where it's not blown. It's not up on the wall. Well, it's almost on the wall. Gonna pull it back just a tad for the eyes. Maybe about -6. And that's it. That's done. Now, I know I've gone over a little bit here, so I'm going to just add one more thing that I thought somebody out there would want to see. I'm sorry it's gone over. I had timed it, and I had it under an hour, but I'm talking a lot. So I'm going to send this back over. Now that I have this iteration, this completed one, I'm going to send it back over to Photoshop, and I'm going to do this quickly, and then we can discuss it in Q&A, or we can go at it in... we can talk about it at email or on the phone, whatever you want to do, or text me, and I'll go through it very slowly with you. If you need me to go through details, that's fine. I'd love to do it. But some people would like to maybe have their own signature on their images. I know some people in the club are doing it already, but if you haven't done it before, it's pretty easy to load it on a. See, I'm on a brush tip now. See the brush thing here? This is actually a brush tip, which. I have a link that I can give you guys if you want to know how to do this. It's very simple. And once you have, it's on a brush tip, you can drop it in. It's not going to be this large. Right now I've got a little glitch in my software because I updated inadvertently. And, once you click your mouse, it drops your signature in. And then of course you have adjustments for opacity. And that's pretty cool. And you can also pick a color for it. If you want to change the color, you can do that. So I am done. Okay, so this, again, is a sky shot. The one after that, correct exposure here, and then we did the land, and I was looking at these wonderful Florida swamp lilies, which we had never seen before. They're absolutely gorgeous, and they were just carpeting this field out here. So there's your land, and then here's your final. Thank you.